Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and tonight's guest is Suzy Hansen, author of The Dual Soul Connection, a work that uniquely combines absorbing details of the lifelong alien encounters that Suzy has had with scientific examination by Dr. Rudy Schild, an astrophysicist from the Harvard-Smithsonian Centre for Astrophysics. Now, Hansen and Dr. Schild address issues of spirituality, consciousness, modes of telepathy, alien culture, alongside scientific concepts of advanced physics, holograms, organic conscious technology, all within the framework of contact with these non-human species. Significantly, this book outlines human participation in complex alien programs that assist and advance humankind, and Hansen's experience of a dual soul identity central to this positive agenda. Now, Hansen's clear, empirical approach gives the fullest description of how this off-planet civilization seeks to prepare us for contact, and answers the why question by describing in detail the how. Dual soul connection highlights our interconnectedness with a wider universal family, revealing a process of disclosure by the aliens themselves, a journey of unfolding contact the whole of mankind is undertaking together. Make sure to go to leakproject.com, become a member at leakproject.com and get access to exclusive content. Also, access to ad-free podcasts, either live streaming or downloadable. You can also become a member at youtube.com/clandestine timelord. Enjoy the presentation. Talk to you soon.
Primary and secondary school teacher for 28 years in New Zealand and gained a qualification in counselling, and worked for 8 years on a management committee of a counselling service here in the city I live in New Zealand. But also I have started investigating New Zealand UFO sightings and contact experiences in the 70s. So around about 1975, when I was 20 and I had a rather extraordinary experience on a lonely country road, that really catapulted me into interviewing people and collecting reports of sightings around the country. And eventually in 2000 I formalised this by setting up a network called UFOCUS NZ Research Network, which covers the whole of New Zealand. So I have investigators in different parts of New Zealand who interview people and collect the sighting reports, which we collate and put on our website for everybody to access. We've got a lot of other interesting material on there as well, and our archives actually go back to 1908 in New Zealand. But also I set up in 1989 a group for supporting those, abductee support group in New Zealand, supporting those who've had contact experiences. And since then I've written the book, The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement, along with contributions by Dr. Rudy Schild in the States. And I've set up communicatorlink.com, which offers support to people worldwide who've had these kinds of experiences.
Now, how old were you when you had your first experience?
Well, the first experiences I had were in early childhood, but also in a hypnosis regression. I talked about how I actually was planning this life before incarnating into this current life. So I had met with various spiritual beings, etc., and went through a process of preparation before entering this life. So you could say that I have also had contact with the ETs since then, because they were among those that I conferred with as a soul at that time. But right from early childhood, I had memories of dreams, small creatures, glowing creatures entering my room at night, talking to me without moving their mouths. I had a very strong affinity with them. I didn't feel afraid of them. Discussed it with family members who said it was, based on the Christian doctrine and religion at the time in New Zealand, were seen as guardian angels who'd come to visit me. That's how it was explained to me by my great aunts. But as time went by and I examined this more as an adult, particularly after that experience I had on a lonely country road at age 20, then I came to view it differently, as not so much having contact with spirits, although that was happening as well, but with extraterrestrial entities.
What are these extraterrestrial entities like? I mean, what do they act like? What do they look like?
Well, the entities that I've had the most contact with are a species of greys. I'm well aware that there appear to be a number of species of greys visiting our planet, because not all of the stories that you hear about people's experiences with greys are positive. However, mine were positive. I acknowledge that other people have not had those kinds of experiences, though. Not all people. So, yes, my experiences were positive. I've also seen other entities on board the craft. I have never seen a reptilian, but I have seen a mantis-like entity, and I have seen very tall, slim, human-like entities, but also a lot of actually humans on board the craft as well, and mixtures of the different species.
Do you make contact with them at all?
I don't make contact with them as such as they make contact with me, although on occasions it seems that I have actually made contact with them in order to solve particular problems in my life or directions in my life involving the contact and UFO field.
What else can you tell us about that mantis type ET?
Okay, well, I have seen him a number of times on craft, but on one particular occasion, I entered a room with a grey and was taken to meet a tall entity that was probably about between 6 and 7 feet tall, very closely resembling what we know as a praying mantis, but highly intelligent and dressed in a white jacket-like garment. And I talked with this entity telepathically for some time, and I had a healing procedure at that time on the craft.
What was the craft like?
Well, on that occasion, I only recall seeing inside in particular rooms, but I do know that I have been taken on to a variety of different craft. One of them, which I describe in the book, was shaped like a box, a shoebox, a giant shoebox. And when I first had memory of seeing this and then being taken on board it, the next day I felt I must have misrecalled it. It couldn't possibly be aerodynamic. It couldn't possibly be that shape. But of course, over time, I found that many other people around the world have also seen these large shoebox-shaped craft, and certainly that's what I was taken on board. But I've seen a variety of other craft. On one occasion, I was taken on board a very large craft, almost like a small city, which was shaped like Saturn or like a large walnut. And it's interesting to note that in 1986, I think it was, a Japanese pilot approaching an airport in Alaska had an encounter with a craft of that size and magnitude and that shape.
You know, it reminds me of the film Dune, where they used that special spice to allow these ginormous craft to move through time and space. If something isn't aerodynamic, then you wouldn't think it was using rocket-type technology. It'd be more so bending the reality of time and space together, I guess, essentially. So, I mean, what is it like for you to go through these experiences? Give our audience, if you would, a taste of actually being there and experiencing something.
Well, it's quite difficult to do because I'll give it my best shot though, because there are a number of different ways, for example, that I've been taken on board a craft. So I'll just focus on that for a minute. I have been taken up, as many people have been, in beams of light. which seem to lift you and extract you off the ground. There's a moment of feeling as if you have just jumped, and then you're kind of silently and peacefully being taken up in this beam and inside a craft. But on other occasions, such as the incident when I was 20, my whole car was actually lifted off the ground and held beside a spherical object that then, by some kind of magnetic attraction that I don't understand, because it was, say, 20 feet away from this object, but it was being held in place, and it was taken up and into a large a triangular-shaped dark craft, a very much larger craft. On other occasions, I have actually left my body as a soul, as a ball of light, and have actually found myself on board a craft in that form. So there's a number of different ways that you can end up on the craft, not just the standard one that's well known in abduction scenarios of going up in a beam of light. But going into a craft is a very, very different environment. It took me many, many, many years to come to terms with this and to understand what was happening to me. And for a while, memory of those experiences, because I did have quite extensive conscious memory of either the whole experience or the beginning and end or parts in the middle, which I had to somehow piece together in my mind and explore the missing parts many years later in regression. But it took a long time to assimilate this into my life, to study it, and be very careful about trying to track down people who may have seen something in the area where I had an experience at the time, trying to gather corroborative evidence and witnesses to certain events. So I outline a lot of this in my book, because my experiences are not just something that I've just recalled. I actually have a lot of corroborative data that was happening in New Zealand at the time in the UFO field that surrounded some of my experiences.
Now, have you had experiences also where other people were involved that know you personally?
Yes, at times I have. For example, I recall seeing a very tall, thin man on board the craft in a particular incident that I write about, and I call the test incident. And this person human who was with me, with a group of humans, had a great sense of humour and quite distinct features and looks, because he was tall and thin. And many, many years later, some rather extraordinary circumstances occurred, which I know Eve Lorgan would align with in some of her books and her theories, where I actually met this person in life, and he is now my husband. So these kinds of things do happen, where people are brought together for a reason or a purpose.
Absolutely. Now tell us more about your book, The Dual Soul Connection.
Okay, this book really outlines my experiences from pre-birth, because I do describe the incident that came out unexpectedly in regression that concerned my planning, if I can put it that way, to come into this life. But the book outlines my experiences from early childhood right through to almost the present day. And I have a lot of experiences that I have recollection of, so I had to select out those that outlined really what I wanted to convey in the book, that there is a program and an agenda happening, that there are multiple programs, educational programs and awareness programs that humans are involved with different groups of ETs. And I believe that this is leading towards a positive outcome whereby we create change with their assistance from within our own society and civilization. This goes against the idea that some people have that the ETs are going to come and save us. No, they are helping us to save ourselves, is what I believe. So the book outlines many of the experiences. Some of them are healing experiences. Some of them have been taken to underground facilities with large groups of other people who arrive on craft. Where we attend lectures, if I can put it that way, sometimes just with greys, sometimes with humans who are there also in a chain of command. So the book generally covers the kinds of experiences I've had throughout my life to almost the present day. And Dr. Schild, I got in contact with Dr. Schild during the process of writing the manuscript, and because I'm not a scientist, I'm not scientifically minded, I wanted him to have a look at the manuscript and perhaps give me some pointers and help me to understand some of the physics and alien technology that I describe in the book. I wasn't too sure how he would react to this, whether he would be interested or not, but he replied to me and said, well, this is very interesting. Send me a few more, not just the 3 you've sent me. Send me some more chapters. And at first he offered to help me to understand the science so that I could write about it. But having read more of the chapters, he said, I really understand this material, and if it's okay with you, I would actually like to be a part of the book and contribute to it by way of commentary, footnotes, and a scientist's epilogue. Now, I'd just like to add that some years before beginning writing the book, I actually saw a speech DVD of Rudy's, and as soon as I saw the speech DVD, I felt as if I knew this man. Well, of course I didn't, but that was the feeling that I had, and it took some years for me to be able to actually get in contact with him, and I just felt that it was somehow meant to be the way it fell together.
Yeah, that's great. And what would you say the most fascinating ET experience that you've ever had was?
Well, they're all quite fascinating as a person who's gone through them and tried to investigate the substance of them as best as I can. By that I mean some of the technology I described, the physics behind it, etc. But I think one of the most interesting ones, which I know Dr. Schild, I thought would think it was a bit too way out, but it was actually the one that he aligned with the most, which was surprising, was one where I was taken with a group of 6 other humans into a very small white room on a craft, and we were told by the Greys who were with us that they were going to show us an aspect of their recreation, of their joy. We didn't know what to expect, but they told us that we would be surprised and be prepared for something that was very different. At that point in time, the walls seemed to move away from us, creating a very much larger white room. And many experiencers and contactees talk about this aspect of being on a craft or in a room where something that looks quite small, once you step into it, suddenly seems very much bigger. That's quite an often reported aspect. So we were taken into this room, and these entities stood in front of us, not just greys, but some other species as well. And we were asked to watch and observe, and before our eyes they began to disintegrate, and they began to basically move apart as if every molecule in their body was creating space and moving into a shower of coloured light. And we saw this shower of coloured light like a mist just rise up around the top of the room, and we were asked to try to continue communicating with them. Well, that actually wasn't difficult because these entities were still communicating telepathically with us through consciousness. They didn't need their physical body to do that. And we were asked to see if we could contribute in some way. So we were asked to utilize what we had learnt from them about matter and transposing energy. And we were asked to create different forms in the air using this shower or coloured mist that was once their bodies to create this. Then they began creating different shapes that came into our mind. They would respond by forming these shapes. And then we were asked if we could actually let ourselves go to the extent that we could disintegrate, if I can put it that way as well. But we weren't able to do that. I guess conditioning and fear of what might happen was too great. So we were just able to observe what took place. They then came back, filtering back down like a shower of sand, if I can put it that way, into their forms. Now, Dr. Schild has made quite a few comments about this in the book at the end of that chapter. But it's interesting that after the book came out, I was contacted by a man called Carlos, who was featured in Dr. John Mack's book, Abduction. Carlos is in his late 70s now, but he was very fascinated by what I had written because it aligned perfectly with an experience that he had back in the 70s, and we have communicated quite deeply about the effect it had on us and what took place and our perspective of it, which has been an interesting outcome.
And you had a pretty big impact on a whole bunch of UFO files that were released in 2009 and 2010 in New Zealand, right?
Yes, because I sort of have a foot in both camps, the contact arena as a researcher and an experiencer myself, but also in sightings, because I started, as I said, UFO NZ Research Network in New Zealand in the year 2000. So around about 2008, 2009, on behalf of my network, I began lobbying the then Chief of Defence in New Zealand and asking for the files to be released as they had done in Canada, Australia and the UK. And over time he came to the conclusion that that was the right thing to do, to release what they had in their files. So after lobbying for about a year or more, the files came out in 2010 and 2011. There's 15 volumes of the files. Much of the contents about some of the very well-known New Zealand sightings we already had data on, and they were publicly known. But it's interesting to note that we've been through the files very carefully, and there are over 90 pilot sightings, most of which were never investigated, which we think is a real crying shame that the Air Force who produced these files, as far as we know, had not investigated these sightings. But we also have sightings in our archive that where witnesses state that the Air Force interviewed them and told them that if they talked publicly they would deny any knowledge of it. However, those reports, obviously written by the Air Force, did not appear in the files, so it would seem to us that there may be other intelligence files or confidential files that were not released with the general 15 volumes. It's also very interesting to note that the extent of the interest in New Zealand in the UFO sighting field, because as I said, we have had some fairly phenomenal sightings over here, the better known one being the Kaikoura Lights, which occurred in 1978-79 and went worldwide, and is still considered one of the best sightings worldwide because it was captured on video, on radar and visually by witnesses. So a lot of that information was in the files. The rest of it we still have to access or wait for it to be released at some later date.
And out of those files, if you were to handpick 3 that really just blew your mind and...
Well, as I was just saying, the interest worldwide, you have the skeptics and other groups saying that sightings have diminished and there's not so many sightings taking place. But certainly that's not what our data as UFO researchers and investigators shows. We have a massive archive of sightings. On our site we have sightings from 2005 onwards, but the rest are in our archive, as I said, going back to 1908. And I think something that always strikes me as a sighting investigator is the effect that it has on people. Once they've seen something that's out of the box and out of what they may see as logical and normal or acceptable, it can have a variety of effects on people, and sometimes they have to question their whole belief systems, their religious systems, their societal beliefs, their cultural beliefs. So it does have quite a deep impact on many people. And so the job of a sighting investigator is not just to document the sighting, but also to assist people in many ways to feel comfortable with what they've experienced and help them to understand that many millions of people worldwide have had similar sightings.
Now, have you read a lot of counters of experiences that you've had also from other people around the world?
Yes, as I said, I've been looking at contact experiences in New Zealand since 1975, so I've been in this a very long time. And I've had a lot of people in New Zealand telling me about their experiences, but I also began speaking at international conferences about my own experiences in 1997. So I have had a long time, many years, where people have been contacting me from around the world, and particularly I think since my book came out, I've had many people telling me about their experiences and trying to gain some understanding of what's happening to them and where they fit in the greater scheme of things. And I think one of the most frequently asked questions that people ask me is what am I supposed to do in life? I feel like there's something important I have to do that's part of something, but I don't know what it is. Can you help me to discover that? Well, what the best thing we can do is lead our life well as good people and do what we can for our planet and our communities and our societies and our fellow human beings. And I believe that our destiny, or whatever we are supposed to be involved in, will drop in front of us in due course. I think timing is a very vital aspect that I talk about as an experiencer. If I look back over my own life, I can see times where I was impatient to understand something or impatient to find answers, and they just didn't come at that time. But when they did come, it was the right time, and so many other things coincided with that helped me along the way a bit further. So I think patience is one of those things that we have to have, because I believe that what we are supposed to do, once we express our intent consciously and mentally and psychically, then things will start to happen in our lives.
Now, what are we supposed to do as a whole?
As a whole, well, look at the state of our planet. I think most people know the answer to that, but are not necessarily doing something constructive to help it in their daily life. If we look at the state of our environment, with pollution and climate change and our weather patterns changing and water drying up in many places around the planet, people are homeless, people are displaced and don't know where to go. Secret agreements are being formed between governments which the public don't necessarily know about. Our future in many ways is being decided for us by big corporations and political alliances. So I think that what we need to do is become more aware of what's happening in the world, to our planet that we reside on, and to the people who share that residence with us and the many other species, and endeavour to do what each of us can do in our own lives every day to the best of our ability. And that will vary between every person, depending where they are, what culture they're in, what belief systems they have, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the way that the world is going right now, it's certainly, a lot of people don't have that balance. And one of the things about the natives, any culture, whether it be in Australia, New Zealand, North America, South America, wherever, it seemed like they were really balanced. They would always put back what they took. And you see the way that things are going right now, you just wonder how long can this world continue to be, plummeted until there's some type of balance there. Have you been given any information as far as the coming next few years? I mean, how often do you have contact with these extraterrestrials?
On a relatively regular basis. My most recent contact that I recall was just prior to the terrorist bombings in Paris. And on that occasion, I was taken on board a craft with a lot of other people. Went to an auditorium kind of situation where there were a lot of other humans. And there was a grey talking to us along with a human in dark overalls who talked to us about the state of the planet and different things coming up. Now, there was a great deal of detail that was conveyed to us, but the next day all I recalled was being with a lot of people, the grey and the human up the front, being told about things coming up and being told that the group of humans that I seem to be a part of, who are often in this lecture situation on a craft or at some facility, We were told that we were going to be held back a little bit in the work that we're doing, that it would start moving again in time, but there were going to be quite a few things happening on the planet, and that the ETs were observing that and looking at what the outcomes are going to be and how people deal with that. But some years ago, it's interesting to note, I had a regression therapist staying in my home who had been doing some work over here with New Zealanders, and we investigated my memory that I have of some years back, where 2010 and 2011, where I was taken on a craft and given, along with a lot of other humans, a warning about Earth changes coming up, and we were told that we would actually be in the future lecturing to groups of people on craft who may be involved with this in some way. And the very day that we did that particular regression and looked into this memory that I have, we had an earthquake here in New Zealand, and within a short space of time we had the tsunami in Japan, and then a whole cascading series of earth changes that happened that were very tragic and traumatic for people around the world. So that really brought it home to me that we are being observed, our planetary state and condition and what's happening with it is being observed by people beyond our planet, entities beyond our planet who are concerned about our future. And I write in the book quite extensively about what I was told by the Greys about the programs that they're running to educate humans, and how there are these three waves of humans who have incarnated on the planet for specific purposes, and I enlarge on what each of those three waves is about and what their purpose and job seems to be. And the third wave is around about the age group of my grown-up children's age group, although there will be some younger and older than that. And there are many in that particular group, what I call a third wave, who will make quite dramatic positive changes in the future once they are in positions of responsibility and, if I can put, say, power, in the positive and constructive sense of the word, in positions of power worldwide, where they will actually then be able to make positive changes in many areas, including science or medicine, in agriculture or industry or technology. So we are being assisted to bring these things to the fore and to make those changes to help ourselves in the future, because I see the future of this planet as being quite bleak if we don't make changes sometime soon. And even then, we don't know whether it's going to, how effective it's going to be, or whether some of those changes will be too late. And I look now at the homeless people in the world, not just the refugees who were streaming up through Europe when I was speaking in Europe last year, but in many other parts of the world, people who have had their homes and their land and their countries basically divided or taken away from them. And some years ago, the Greys talked to a group of humans on a craft that I was amongst, and they warned us that when the time comes where people find they don't know where to go geographically or physically or culturally or mentally or emotionally, which seems to be the state many people are in on this planet at the moment, then we're coming to a very difficult time in our planetary history. So I see that time as being in its beginning stages now.
Now, could you talk to us also about some of these technologies that you have had access to and that has been shared with you?
Okay, well, I describe a number of technologies which seem to me to be very advanced versions of some of the technology that has come out in our own civilization in the last 10 years. Now, I did an interview recently with an interviewer who said, oh, well, you were watching Star Wars or something like that when you were a kid. Well, no, because don't forget, I live in New Zealand, and I didn't have a TV as a child. We're a country with a population of 4.5 million, and while computers were in homes in many places in the world in the 90s, they were not in homes in New Zealand. They were only in medical or university situations in New Zealand in the 90s, early 90s. Now, in 1993, I had an experience on board a craft which I remembered in absolute intricate detail the next day and documented. And I write 2 chapters of my book about this particular incident that I've called The Test, where I was with a group of humans on a craft. We were taken into a room where we had to perform a problem-solving kind of test. And there were 16 humans, and only 4 passed the test, and I was amongst those 4. Now, the test was not so much to gauge the problem that each of us was given to work on. The test was actually about how we could use some of the consciousness skills and telepathic skills and technological skills using technology on a craft that we had been taught over a long period of time. That was actually where the test lay and what we were being examined for. Now, I described in 1993, and that's where, long before I ever had a computer and worked on a computer, I described swipe screens. I described what we would now call a tablet, and I described it in those days as an information tablet. I described it as being very thin, thinner than an X-ray sheet, a small X-ray sheet, but very similar to it in terms of its color. It was like a piece of thin plastic. It was flexible. It could be used like a USB and put into a port on what I now would call a port on this particular computer console I was working on. And I could access alien script on the screen through my mind, not by touching anything as we would touch an icon or click on an icon on our screens today. We just went straight into it with our mind. So a lot of this technology that I recalled using in 1993, it wasn't till 1998 that I first got and used a computer, and even then I didn't use internet. I could only learn to use using Word to type something. So it was well into the year 2000 or so before I actually used internet and saw that some of the things I was using were similar, but not as advanced as what I'd used on the craft. So in the last 10 years, I've seen technology coming out, such as the tablet and Skype and many other things that were used routinely, similar technology used routinely on the craft that I recalled from the 80s and 90s. And also, other healing techniques, etc., and technology that's associated with healing and physical examinations. That use consciousness, that use energy and sound and color, etc. I think that in the future we will move more towards that in our healing and medical procedures in the future rather than invasive operations, etc.
Now, have they given you any actual hardware or tangible stuff you have access to for others to reverse engineer?
No, and I don't know anyone in the thousands and thousands of people who've experienced things like this, and the thousands of people I've talked to, I don't know anyone who's bought a piece of hardware back. You must understand that when you leave a craft, there's a little procedure you go through, and one of those procedures is that you have a decontamination kind of experience. And we're talking about highly advanced entities who are not going to let you take a little piece of technology with you. I think in the discussions I have had with some greys on board craft, there's a readiness for some of this kind of technology. For example, on one occasion, they talked to a group of us about gaining sustenance from plants in times of need and emergency in emergency situations such as earth changes, tsunamis, volcanoes erupting, etc., where you could gain sustenance from a plant through its energetic field. Now, I've talked to a neuroscientist and a plant physiologist about this. He's very curious about it, But we don't have at present enough knowledge to link what I'm talking about and what other experiences talk about to the technology or the understanding we have today. So, as Dr. Schild said, we have to move through a process of discovery before we can actually increase our technology and get to the point that they are at. We have to go through the motion of understanding the physics and the science behind it before we can make that leap. Although I do believe that that some of the technology that people report seeing on a craft, such as I described, that's now coming out in our own civilization, there may be aspects of that have been leaked to scientists or technology buffs around the world. Because we have had these giant steps forward in technology in, say, the last 100 years.
Yeah, there certainly has been. And also, I remember interviewing somebody a while back that talked about some treaties that were in play back in I'm trying to remember the administration, a long time ago. This would have been 50 years ago, I think Eisenhower. And according to this treaty, they offered a lot of human subjects for testing for these ETs, and they gave, in return, technologies. Do you know anything about that? Is that just internet, psychobabble, or conspiracy gone wrong?
Well, I think that there are a lot of theories about that. Some of them may be conspiracy theories, I don't know. I don't have any personal knowledge or experience of that myself. As I said, to offer subjects for whatever purpose, and some people describe some quite unpleasant circumstances on craft. If humans are offering human subjects for that, then I would not approve of that at all. I would think that's totally unacceptable. But the ETs that I have had my experiences with don't appear to engage in that kind of exchange or agreement, although I have been in a lecture situation where they have made reference to certain groups of humans making those kinds of agreements. But on many occasions I have seen humans actively working on craft, on-board craft, so they may be in a large hangar area looking at the technology involved in a craft. They may be involved in lecture situations and healing situations, and that is quite common. Many experiencers and contactees report having seen that where there are humans actively working on craft. So as to which group they belong to and what their agenda is, the ones that I have had contact with, it's all been very positive. But I acknowledge that there are other theories and other reports of incidents that aren't quite so positive.
I mean, when you hear stories about people that get literally probed, I interviewed a gal that was pregnant, and she said that she got taken into this craft, and this 3-pronged needle was injected into her stomach when she was pregnant with her second child, and she still has the scars to show it. It's interesting because I talked to some people that say their experiences are amazing, and then I talked to others that say they're some of the most horrific, frightening experiences they've ever had, and they feel like they were kidnapped against their will. And they say if that was a human being that was doing it to us, then it would be looked at as kidnapping and torture, not just oh hi, I'm just going to check something out real quick, we're from space so it's okay.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to go back a couple of steps and say for 20 years after many of these memories began to rise up in my consciousness, because in my childhood years I had a lot of memories of entities coming into my room and dreams, etc., where I could describe things quite distinctly. Then in my teenage years it was less prevalent, less regular, but when I hit 20, bang, it was full on for many years, and of course up to today. At that time, back in the 90s, there was a lot of controversy about regression and hypnosis and whether or not it was the right thing for people to do. And because I had quite extensive conscious memory of many of my experiences, or a smattering of memory of others, I decided at that time, because of the controversy and because I'm quite a cautious person, that I would not undergo regressive hypnosis at that time. So for about 20 years, I had colleagues in the contact field, many of them researchers or regression therapists themselves, who encouraged me to have regressive hypnosis, but I turned it down for a very long time until I felt the time was right. And at that point, I suddenly woke up one morning completely out of the blue and had this burning desire that it was now the right time to go and have regressive hypnosis on some of my contact events. And within 5 days, I had flown to another country and had started a process of doing hypnosis on some of those events. And I've continued to do that from time to time over the years. That was very rewarding for me and very helpful because it filled in many of the gaps in some of those experiences, but the timing was quite incredible, where I might investigate under hypnosis with a therapist a particular event and find that something that came out of there in a very short space of time suddenly became very relevant and very useful in my life and led me to understand something much better. So it seems as if there has been this process of leading me along the way, if I can put it that way, and definitely this timing aspect. So the experience of remembering where I had met with this spiritual group prior to coming into this life, that's very interesting because the reason why I did this particular regression with a therapist was because I'd had this kind of flashback memory several years before. It was this flashback memory of being in this very large white space with what I describe as like a council of people, and I know that word is kind of a bit hackneyed in the contact scene these days, but it was like a committee, if I can put it that way, to use another similar word, of different entities and balls of light who conveyed to me that they were like the spiritual hierarchy or the spiritual guardian group of this planet, and that there were many, many more, millions of them in the universe looking after planets and solar systems, etc., where there is intelligent life. And I had this memory of being in this room and I knew that I was a purple ball of light. I knew I didn't have a body, but I had consciousness and I could hear or see or understand in some way what was going on. And I recalled that with me was this vibrant blue ball of light, and that I was not actually doing much of the communicating. It was as if this blue ball of light was acting on my behalf. And a life was presented to me and decisions were made about me entering that life. And then that's all that I remember from this little flashback memory. So that was investigated in regressive hypnosis, and a very, very much larger and much more detailed event came out where I was, first of all, a tiny spark of light. I'll just give it to you very briefly. In like a field of consciousness with lots of other little sparks of consciousness. And suddenly I felt this electric tingling, if I can put it that way, and I became aware of two opportunities for a life that were somehow approaching me. And using consciousness, I could examine these two potential lives, and it was as if the universe was calling me to make a decision. Do you want to take one of these lives? And I chose this life. Once I'd made that conscious decision, conscious intent, yes, so this one, I'll take this one, I was then found myself with other souls or other balls of light, and once I'd made that intent and I began drawing information and knowledge from my soul source, if I can put it that way, all that I have been in past lives, I then became a dense ball of light and found myself surrounded by other balls of light. So there was this progression moving through. I then found myself in front of this committee council that I have just described in my flashback memory, and that whole situation played out where they were considering whether or not I would actually be suitable for this life. So there is drawn into question the idea of free will. Do we actually have entire free will? Because in this situation, no. It was a discussion and a consensus decision that was made between these entities and myself and this other blue ball of light with me. One side made a decision and they had made the decision, yes, we're all happy, this is going to take place. I then found myself as a ball of light with the blue ball of light accompanying me, and I found myself on a grey craft. Now that was a real surprise and shock. I hadn't expected that one. And there we were given an education or a background to do with this life and the planet and what we would do in this life. And we were told that we would have a soul enhancement. So something would be taking place with the soul, and many years later, of course, I discovered that this was a dual soul capacity, which I write about in my book, where there is this other awareness that the soul has that is able to tap into the grey consciousness or the ET consciousness. And so I was told that a body would be engineered, and many experiencers and contactees talk about this, where they know that their physical form has been genetically engineered, and this is often a familial thing that experiencers talk about, and this was the case with me. And then I incarnated after that. So this whole scenario came out, which Dr. Schild, who studies consciousness and was very interested in and made a lot of comment about in the book.
Well, that's incredible, and I'd strongly recommend our listeners check out the Dual Soul Connection, and if you'd like to know more, check out communicatorlink.com. There's articles, access to these books, news, and contact information. This has been great. I really appreciate you coming on the show with us. And is there anything that I might have missed that I should have asked before we close out tonight?
No, I don't think so. Just I'd like to add, as well as www.communicatorlink.com, which is my contact website, there's also www.ufocusnz.org.nz, which is our sightings website. And I do hope to hear from some of your listeners in the future. And thank you very much, Rex.
Absolutely. It was just great to speak with you. Folks, also make sure to check out leakproject.com. If you become a contributing member, you'll have access to exclusive content. Also, all the podcasts are commercial-free. As a contributing member, you can either download them or just listen to them on the website. Also, go to youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. You'll get access to the latest podcasts as well. Be safe, everybody, and be the change you want to see. Talk to you soon.